Morning light filtered through Sterling Manor's immense windows, casting long, pale shadows across the breakfast table. Eleanor Vance sat quietly, her silver locket a cool weight against her skin, observing her husband Alexander. He scanned the financial section of a newspaper, impeccable in his dark suit, his gray eyes already alight with ambition. Eleanor often studied him, searching for the man she once knew, the man whose dreams she had quietly helped to build. She sipped her lukewarm tea, the delicate porcelain cup feeling insubstantial. She had spent the early hours reviewing market trends, an old habit she never truly abandoned. A small strategic observation formed in her mind regarding the current merger Alexander pursued so feverishly. It seemed a valuable insight, a potential safeguard against a subtle market shift. She hesitated, as she always did, before speaking. Alexander, she began, her voice a soft murmur, barely disturbing the room's quiet hum. He did not immediately respond, his gaze fixed on the dense columns of print. About the Sinclair acquisition. I noticed a slight fluctuation in the tech sector's capital flow this past week. It might be prudent to consider a staggered investment, rather than a single lump sum, to mitigate any unforeseen shifts. She spoke clearly, articulating her point with precision, hoping for a moment of shared intellect, a flicker of professional respect. Alexander's eyes finally lifted from the page, not to meet hers but to glance vaguely in her direction. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped his lips, a subtle dismissal. He folded the newspaper with a crisp snap, placing it precisely beside his untouched plate of fruit. "Eleanor, my dear," he said, his tone smooth, almost patronizing, "I appreciate your continued interest." He let the word interest hang, implying naive, amateur curiosity. "Business strategy is quite complex. I assure you my team has every angle covered. Your insights, while sweet, are hardly necessary in matters of this scale." He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture both elegant and utterly condescending. It was a practiced movement, one she had seen countless times, always directed at her suggestions, her ideas, her quiet contributions. The casual flick of his wrist felt like a physical blow. A cold knot tightened in her stomach, making it difficult to swallow. She felt the familiar sting of being relegated, her thoughts deemed utterly irrelevant. She simply nodded, her gaze dropping to her tea, the small, fragile hope for his acknowledgement dissolving into silence. He returned to his newspaper, the brief interruption already forgotten. Hours later, the sun climbed higher, casting bright rectangles across the marble floors of the manor's main hallway. Eleanor had been tending her small rose garden, the earthy scent a welcome distraction from the morning's slight. As she walked back toward the house, intending to freshen up, a low murmur of voices reached her from Alexander's study. The door was ajar, a sliver of sound escaping into the vast space. She paused, not meaning to eavesdrop, but Alexander's voice, sharp and distinct, cut through the quiet. "No, absolutely not, Sarah," he was saying, his voice resonating with an impatience he rarely displayed directly to Eleanor. "My wife will not be attending the gala. Make sure her name is not on any guest list, nor on any publicity materials. This event is critical for my image, for the finalization of the merger. We cannot afford any distractions." There was a pause, a rustle of papers, and then Alexander's voice again, colder this time, laced with an unmistakable edge of disdain. "Her presence would simply not align with the narrative we are building. She understands." Eleanor froze, her hand still hovering over the cool brass doorknob of a linen closet. The words struck her with a physical force, a sharp, unexpected pain that made her gasp silently. Her breath caught in her throat, a sudden tightness constricting her chest. To be explicitly excluded, to be deemed a distraction in a mismatch for his narrative, all while being overheard, felt like a public shaming, even in her own home. Her cheeks burned, a flush of humiliation spreading across her face. He had not even bothered to tell her himself, instead relaying the decision through his assistant, treating her as a mere inconvenience. The coldness in his tone, the way he spoke of her as an abstract problem rather than a person, a wife, left a bitter taste. She stood there for a long moment, unmoving, the sound of her own ragged breathing loud in her ears, before she slowly, quietly retreated, her steps muffled by the thick carpet. Later that evening, after a dinner eaten in strained silence, Alexander finally addressed the matter directly. They were in the grand drawing room, the only light coming from the flickering flames in the enormous fireplace. Eleanor sat on an antique velvet sofa, pretending to read a book, the words blurring before her eyes. Alexander, standing by the mantelpiece, swirling a glass of amber liquid, cleared his throat. "Eleanor," he began, his voice calm, measured, devoid of any warmth. He did not look at her, instead gazing into the dancing flames as if rehearsing his lines. "About the gala next week, the culmination of the merger, a truly monumental occasion for my career." He paused, taking a sip of his drink. Eleanor kept her gaze fixed on the page, her heart a dull thrum against her ribs. She braced herself for the inevitable, the words she had already heard, now delivered with a chilling directness. "I have decided it would be best if you did not attend," he continued, his voice perfectly even. He finally turned, his gray eyes piercing, utterly devoid of apology. "This is a high-profile event, Eleanor. The media will be scrutinizing every detail, every guest. My public image, my carefully cultivated brand, is paramount. And frankly, my dear, your simple presence, your quiet demeanor, it wouldn't quite fit the grandiosity of the occasion. It might even detract from what I am trying to achieve." The words hung heavy in the air, each one a deliberate, calculated insult. He was not just saying she was simple. He was implying she was a liability, a blight on his meticulously constructed facade. She felt the weight of years of his subtle disdain pressing down on her, crushing her. She thought of all the late nights she had spent, the quiet sacrifices, the strategic advice she had offered, all to build this man, this empire he now called his own. Now, at his moment of perceived triumph, she was deemed unworthy to even stand beside him. The injustice of it was a bitter, burning sensation in her throat. She wanted to scream, to challenge him, to remind him of everything she had done, everything she truly was. But she did not. Her training, her long-held habit of quiet endurance, held her in check. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, betraying none of the turmoil raging within her. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her hurt. "I understand," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, a whisper that seemed to evaporate into the vast, silent room. It was a lie, of course. She did not understand his cruelty, his utter lack of empathy, but she understood his ambition, his relentless drive for power and public adoration. She understood that she was merely a component in his life, and a replaceable one at that, in his grand scheme of things. He gave a curt nod, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, believing she had accepted his decree without question. He turned back to the fireplace, his attention already elsewhere. The conversation, for him, concluded. Eleanor rose from the sofa, the velvet cool against her dress. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward their shared bedroom, the silence of the manor amplifying the hollowness she felt. The grand, opulent furnishings seemed to mock her, each gilded frame, each silk drape, a testament to a life she did not truly share, a life where she was an increasingly unwelcome guest. She reached the bedroom, the heavy door closing behind her with a soft click, sealing her into a space of quiet despair. She walked to the ornate, gilded mirror that dominated one wall, its gold leaf gleaming softly in the subdued light. Her reflection stared back at her, a woman dressed plainly, her dark hair simply styled, her blue eyes wide and luminous. She studied her own face, searching for something, some trace of the woman she used to be, the woman who had dared to dream, to build. A flicker of deep pain crossed her features, a raw vulnerability that she usually kept hidden, even from herself. The humiliation of the day, the cold, calculated dismissal welled up within her, threatening to overwhelm her composure. Her lower lip trembled almost imperceptibly. But then, as she continued to gaze into her own eyes, a subtle change began. The pain, though still present, was slowly, deliberately overshadowed. A hardening, resolute glint ignited deep within her eyes, a spark of something fierce and unyielding. The gilded mirror, once a symbol of the opulence Alexander had built, now showed Eleanor a woman on the precipice. Her blue eyes, usually soft with quiet observation, held a glint like polished steel, a stark contrast to the deep sorrow etched around them. She stepped away from the cold glass, the silence of Sterling Manor immediately rushing in to fill the space around her. It was a silence that had grown vast and imposing over the years, a constant echo of Alexander's absence, his increasing detachment. The grand staircase, an architectural marvel of polished marble and wrought iron, stretched before her. Each step, each curve was designed to impress, to proclaim a certain stature. Yet, as Eleanor descended, her silk dressing gown whispering against the marble, it felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. The air was always cool here, even in summer, carrying the faint, sterile scent of expensive cleaning products and the lingering aroma of Alexander's preferred, potent cigar. She passed portraits of ancestors she did not know, their eyes following her with an unseeing gaze. A small breakfast was laid out in the formal dining room, a table set for one. The silver gleamed under the soft morning light, filtering through the tall windows. Eleanor picked at a piece of toast, its crust too crisp, its center too airy. Her gaze drifted to the empty chair at the head of the table, a constant, physical representation of the void in her life. There was a time not so long ago when that chair was filled, not by a looming figure of power, but by a man who looked at her with genuine warmth. She remembered the early days of their marriage, a period now wrapped in a haze of bittersweet nostalgia. Alexander had been different then, or perhaps she had been different, seeing only the promise of what he could be. He was a man with fire in his belly, yes, but also with a tenderness in his touch that had slowly, imperceptibly faded. They had lived in a smaller house then, one filled with the scent of her own cooking, not just the fleeting, impersonal aromas of hired staff. He would come home, his tie loosened, and tell her about his day, sometimes laughing about a minor triumph, sometimes sighing over a setback. He would hold her hand, tracing patterns on her skin with his thumb, and his gray eyes, now so often sharp and calculating, had held a softer light. He had loved her simple stories, she recalled, the tales of her quiet upbringing, the values her grandmother had instilled. He had found solace in her unassuming presence, a calm port in the storm of his burgeoning ambitions. He had called her his anchor, his steady star. The words felt like distant echoes now, carried on a forgotten breeze. She could almost hear his low chuckle, the way he would lean in close, sharing a secret dream. Those moments, few and far between as they might have been, were real. They were not performances for an audience, not calculated moves on a corporate chessboard. The memory was sharp, painful like a splinter under her skin. She closed her eyes, picturing his face as it was then, before the lines of stress and unrelenting ambition had carved deep furrows into his brow. He used to bring her wildflowers, not expensive roses, just simple blooms he picked on his walk home. He used to listen, truly listen, to her quiet observations about people, about life. He valued her perspective then, the way she saw the world without the filter of power or profit. Now her perspective was dismissed, a minor inconvenience to be swept aside. A sudden sharp pang of loss tightened her chest. It was not just the loss of Alexander, the man she once knew, but the loss of herself in that partnership. She had allowed herself to be diminished, to fade into the background, believing it was what he needed, what would help him soar. He had soared, indeed, to heights she had secretly orchestrated, but he had left her far, far below, believing her too simple to follow. The bitter taste in her mouth was not just the dry toast, but the residue of years of quiet neglect, of being made to feel small. She pushed the plate away, the clinking ceramics sounding unnaturally loud in the silent room. Her gaze fell upon the silver locket that always rested against her skin, a constant, comforting weight. It was her grandmother's, a simple piece, unadorned, yet holding more value to Eleanor than all the diamonds in Alexander's vault. It was a tangible link to a life he had come to disdain, a life he deemed too insignificant to be associated with his grand, public persona. His words from the previous night, cold and dismissive, echoed in her mind. Your presence would detract from my carefully cultivated image. The sting of them was fresh, raw. The quiet grief she had carried for so long began to curdle, transforming into something colder, harder. It was not anger, not yet, but a fierce protective instinct, not for Alexander but for herself, For the woman her grandmother had raised, for the woman who had painstakingly, secretly, built the very foundation of Alexander's empire. She stood up, the chair scraping softly on the polished floor. The vastness of the manor no longer felt oppressive, but rather like a stage, waiting for a new act. Eleanor walked to her private study, a room tucked away from the more public areas of the house. It was her sanctuary filled with books, not trophies, in the quiet hum of her personal computer, not the boastful pronouncements of Alexander's media feeds. She sat at her desk, the smooth, cool wood a grounding presence. With a deliberate movement, she pulled out her phone, a simple, nondescript model that belied the power it could unleash. She typed a short, coded message. It was time to speak with Thomas Thorne. Later that afternoon, a sleek, unassuming sedan pulled up to the discreet side entrance of a small, elegant art gallery on a quiet street. The gallery was known for its minimalist exhibitions and its almost monastic silence, making it a perfect spot for private conversations. Eleanor, dressed in a simple charcoal gray suit that somehow managed to be both understated and impeccable, stepped out of her own vehicle, her movements fluid and purposeful. The cool autumn air brushed against her skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant city fumes. Inside, Thomas Thorne was already waiting. He sat in a corner, amidst canvases of muted colors, a cup of Earl Grey steaming gently before him. He was a man whose presence exuded calm, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and perceptive behind his spectacles. He rose as Eleanor approached, offering a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. "You requested this meeting." He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. "Thomas," she replied, her voice steady, though a faint tremor ran beneath the surface. She sat, her hands resting calmly on the table, though her fingers were subtly interlaced, a small sign of her internal tension. The scent of fresh paint and old binder filled the air, a welcome change from the sterile grandeur of Sterling Manor. The soft light from a nearby window illuminated the fine dust motes dancing in the air. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Eleanor continued, her gaze direct, unwavering. "I need your insight." Thomas nodded, taking a slow sip of his tea. "Anything, Eleanor. You know that." "It's Alexander," she began, the name falling from her lips with a mix of weariness and a nascent determination. "His ambition, it's escalating. He dismissed me last night, Thomas. Told me my presence would be a detriment to his image at the gala." A faint, almost imperceptible tremor passed through her voice on those last words. Thomas's expression remained calm, but a flicker of concern crossed his features. "I heard a whisper about that, Eleanor. I am truly sorry he caused you such pain." "It's not just the pain, Thomas," Eleanor countered, her voice gaining strength, the earlier tremor now gone. "It's the recklessness. He's making increasingly bold moves, veiled threats against rivals, pushing boundaries that even he used to respect. I've seen the reports, the numbers. He is taking unnecessary risks. He truly believes he is untouchable." She paused, her gaze dropping to her tightly clasped hands. "He called me simple, Thomas. He called my quiet demeanor a lack of ambition." The words were spoken softly, but they carried the weight of years of unspoken hurt. Thomas leaned forward slightly, his eyes holding hers. "He believes that because you allowed him to believe it, Eleanor. For years, you cultivated that image, for his benefit. You gave him the stage, the resources, the opportunity to believe he was a self-made titan." His voice was gentle, not accusatory, but filled with a quiet understanding. "I did," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I wanted him to succeed. I thought that by staying in the shadows, by being his quiet support, I was helping him build something meaningful. I thought he would remember the girl he married, the values we shared." A single tear, unbidden, escaped the corner of her eye, tracing a path down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Instead, he sees only the reflection of his own ego, amplified by the power he thinks he alone created. Thomas reached across the small table, his hand resting briefly over hers, a gesture of silent comfort. "He has forgotten, Eleanor. Or perhaps he never truly knew the depth of the foundation you laid. He has come to confuse the structure with the ground beneath it." The air around them seemed to thicken with unspoken truths. The distant hum of city traffic was the only sound breaking the quiet of the gallery. He is threatening to dismantle what my family spent generations building, Eleanor continued, her voice hardening. His current merger, this grand triumph he is anticipating, it relies on my company's silent partnership. He is blind to the fact that every single one of his victories has been carefully facilitated, meticulously guided by Vance Enterprises, by me. Her grip on her hands tightened, her knuckles turning white. Thomas nodded slowly. Indeed, he is playing with fire, Eleanor, using matches you provided, and he has no idea you hold the water. He withdrew his hand, allowing her space to process her thoughts. The truth is, Alexander Sterling's empire is a carefully constructed illusion, sustained by your strategic genius and the vast resources of Vance Enterprises. You built his pedestal, Eleanor. You placed him upon it. Eleanor looked up, her blue eyes meeting his. And now he expects me to applaud from the shadows, a forgotten architect of his grand design. There was a note of genuine indignation in her voice, a new chord struck after years of quiet resignation. You have options, Eleanor, Thomas stated calmly, his voice firm yet supportive. You always have. Vance Enterprises, under your leadership, is a formidable force. Your network is vast, your influence far-reaching. You are not a simple wife. You are the silent architect, the true power behind a significant portion of this city's economy, including Alexander's. He paused, letting his words sink in. The scent of oil paint seemed to cling to the air, a reminder of the artistic creations around them, each a testament to meticulous planning and execution. You chose to remain anonymous, to operate behind the scenes. That was your prerogative, your strategy. But that choice also allowed Alexander to claim all the credit, to grow unchecked in his arrogance. Eleanor listened, her mind racing, replaying Thomas's words. The weight of her own complicity, her quiet enablement, settled heavily upon her. She had been so afraid of stifling his ambition, of becoming the kind of powerful woman he might resent, that she had instead become invisible. She had given him everything, and he had thrown it back in her face. He does not respect me, Thomas, she stated. Not as a question, but as a plain, undeniable fact. He never did, not truly. He respected the calm presence I offered, the lack of demands. He respected the quiet space I created for him to thrive. But he never respected my intellect, my capabilities, my worth beyond being a silent accessory. Her voice was soft, but the conviction behind it was absolute. Respect is earned, Eleanor, Thomas said, and sometimes it must be demanded. You have allowed him to take without truly giving. You have allowed him to forget where his true strength came from. You have allowed him to mistake your quiet strength for weakness. He took another sip of his tea, his gaze steady. The gala, this pivotal moment for Alexander, it is also a pivotal moment for you. It offers an opportunity, should you choose to seize it. Eleanor looked out the window at the bustling street outside. People walked by, absorbed in their own lives, unaware of the silent storm brewing within this quiet art gallery. The world outside was dynamic, ever-changing, and she had been content to observe it from a distance. But now she felt an undeniable pull to step into its currents, to make her presence felt. What options, Thomas? She finally asked, her voice low, almost a whisper, but with an underlying current of steel that Thomas immediately recognized. It was the voice of the true Eleanor, the woman he had served for decades, the woman who commanded a vast empire from the shadows. Thomas smiled, a faint, knowing curve of his lips. The options are as vast as your resources, Eleanor. You can continue to allow him to believe he is the sole master of his destiny, watching as he carelessly risks everything, including what is fundamentally yours. Or you can remind him, in the world, of the true architect. You can reveal the source of his power, the hand that has guided him, the mind that has strategized for him. He paused, letting the implication hang in the quiet air between them. The scent of linseed oil was strong now, almost pungent. You can expose the illusion, Eleanor. You can take back control. The merger, this gala, it is his moment to shine, yes. But it can also be your moment to reclaim what is rightfully yours, to demonstrate your true influence. Eleanor's mind began to whirl, not with panic, but with a sudden, electrifying clarity. The scattered pieces of her life, her pain, her power, her silent machinations began to coalesce into a coherent, formidable picture. She had always been the one pulling the strings, the puppet master unseen, allowing Alexander to believe he was dancing on his own. But his arrogance, his casual cruelty, had finally severed that invisible thread. She thought of the years of quiet sacrifice, the countless hours spent poring over reports, making strategic decisions that directly benefited his ventures. She thought of her grandmother's teachings, her insistence on integrity, on recognizing one's own worth. Her grandmother would never have stood for such dismissive treatment, such blatant disrespect. The idea of revealing herself, of stepping out from the comfortable, anonymous shadows she had inhabited for so long, was daunting. It was a complete upheaval of the life she had carefully constructed, a life designed to avoid the very public scrutiny Alexander craved. But the alternative, to continue living as the simple wife, to watch her legacy, her family's legacy, be squandered by a man blinded by his own ego, was no longer tolerable. The thought of further diminishing herself, further accepting his disdain, felt like a betrayal of her very soul. A wave of emotion washed over her, the lingering sting of his words, the deep ache of a love lost, the quiet fury at his ingratitude, and a rising tide of fierce resolve. It was a complex tapestry of feelings, a human mix of pain and nascent power. She had given him the world, and he had offered her only disdain. Now she would take it back. She would show him the true cost of his arrogance. Her fingers instinctively traced the simple silver locket around her neck, its cool metal a familiar comfort against her skin. Inside, a faded sepia-toned photograph of her grandmother offered a silent, loving gaze. A silent, powerful promise formed in her mind. 100 camera flashes painted Alexander Sterling's confident smile in stark, white bursts. He stood at the podium, surrounded by the appreciative murmurs of a packed press conference. The air, thick with anticipation, hummed with palpable energy. Alexander adjusted the microphone, a small gesture that conveyed his absolute command. Every eye in the room fixed on him, a sea of eager faces and outstretched recorders, all desperate for a piece of his story. Alexander's gray eyes, sharp and calculating, swept across the assembled journalists. He savored this moment, the culmination of months of relentless work and cunning negotiation. His voice, smooth and resonant, filled the grand hall. Today, he began, a dramatic pause hanging in the air. We stand on the precipice of a new era for Sterling Holdings. He continued, our merger with an undisclosed partner represents not just a union of assets, but a fusion of vision. He spoke of market dominance, of unparalleled growth, of a future he, Bonon, was forging with his own will. He watched their faces, seeing admiration, a touch of envy, and it fed his ego. He took a sip of water, allowing his words to settle, observing the flurry of notes being taken. This was his stage, his triumph. He had built this empire brick by brick, and the world was finally recognizing his genius. Questions came in a torrent, each one a fresh opportunity for Alexander to shine. He answered them with practiced ease, weaving narratives of strategic brilliance and bold foresight. The undisclosed partner, he explained with a dismissive wave, was simply a financial vehicle. It was a necessary, anonymous cog in the grand machinery of his ambition. The crowd listened, mesmerized by his charisma, his unwavering conviction. Alexander saw the headlines already forming in their minds. Sterling's masterstroke. A faint tremor ran through him, a thrill entirely his own. He felt the familiar rush of power, a heady elixir that drowned out any whispers of doubt. He continued to speak, reinforcing his narrative of sleepless nights and relentless dedication. He presented himself as a titan, victorious through his own talent. Miles away in her quiet penthouse office, Eleanor Vance sat at a polished mahogany desk. The city sprawled beneath her, a silent expanse of glass and steel. The room, devoid of Alexander's flashy opulence, spoke of understated power. Every object was placed with deliberate purpose. The only sound was the soft hum of server racks beyond her soundproof door and the rhythmic tapping of her fingers against a leather-bound planner. She wore a simple, dark silk dress, her long hair pulled back in an elegant knot. Her blue eyes, usually holding a flicker of hidden depth, were now entirely focused, sharp as diamonds. A secure line phone, its discreet red light indicating an active connection, rested against her ear. Her voice, calm and clear, sliced through the quiet. Thomas, the preliminary figures are in. Begin the phased reallocation of assets from the Sterling subsidiary accounts. Her instructions were precise. I want it executed with absolute precision, below the radar of their routine audits. She listened intently, her gaze fixed on a digital readout displaying complex financial graphs. She heard Thomas Thorne's steady, reassuring voice on the other end, confirming her instructions. A faint sigh of relief escaped her lips. This was a delicate dismantling from within, piece by calculated piece. She needed to ensure Alexander's financial scaffolding, which she had so carefully constructed over the years, began to subtly fray. The funds he believed were his, the resources he so casually exploited, would slowly redirect. He would not discover the gaping holes until it was far too late. It was a silent, bloodless coup, orchestrated with the quiet intensity of a surgeon. She leaned back in her chair, the cool leather a steady presence against her spine. Her mind was already several steps ahead. Her heart beat with a slow, deliberate rhythm. This was not vengeance, she told herself, not truly. This was reclaiming what was rightfully hers, untangling herself from a narrative that had never been her own. She moved to another secure line, dialing a number that connected her to her executive team. The faces of her most trusted advisors appeared on the large video screen embedded in her desk. Their expressions were serious, attentive. "Good morning, team," she said, her voice carrying an undeniable authority. "I have a new directive. I want you to prepare a public announcement regarding Vance Enterprises' new strategic direction." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. This announcement will coincide with the week of the Sterling Gala. The murmurs that followed were not of surprise, but of understanding. They knew the unspoken implications. For years, Vance Enterprises had operated largely in the shadows. Its ventures were strategic, its investments deep, but its public face remained anonymous. This was about to change. Eleanor explained their intention to pivot towards more visible, public-facing initiatives, to assert a stronger presence in the global market. She spoke of leveraging their technological advancements, of spearheading environmental initiatives, of a bold new chapter that would inevitably capture international attention. She felt a slight tension in her shoulders, the weight of the coming transformation. Her team listened with unwavering focus, their fingers flying across keyboards as they took notes. She outlined the timeline, the key messaging points, the specific individuals within the media sphere they should target. Her instructions were clear, concise, leaving no room for ambiguity. She watched their faces, seeing their growing excitement, their shared understanding of the seismic shift she was initiating. This was not merely a change in branding, it was a declaration of power. It was a statement to the world that Vance Enterprises, and by extension, Eleanor Vance, was stepping out of the shadows. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, picturing the intricate web of connections, the dominoes she was now nudging into motion. Back at the press conference, Alexander was still holding court, glowing with self-importance. He gestured expansively, his voice booming with unshakable confidence. He spoke of risk, of vision, of the lonely path of true leadership. He omitted, of course, the quiet counsel that had guided his decisions. He left out the anonymous financial backing that had cushioned his falls and amplified his successes. In his narrative, every achievement was solely his own, every brilliant idea a product of his singular mind. He felt the warmth of the spotlight on his face, a comforting heat that affirmed his place at the center of this universe. The flashbulbs were like applause, a constant, flickering ovation for his brilliance. A persistent reporter from a financial news outlet, a woman with sharp eyes and an even sharper mind, pressed him. She asked about the specifics of the merger, particularly the identity of the mysterious unnamed partner. Her notepad lay open, her pen poised. "Mr. Sterling," she asked, her voice cutting through the general buzz, "there's been much speculation about the silent partner in this monumental deal. Can you offer any insights into the entity that facilitated such a complex transaction?" Her gaze was direct, unwavering, seeking to pierce through his polished facade. Alexander Sterling chuckled, a rich, confident sound that resonated with the microphone. He leaned closer to the podium, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. He ran a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair, savoring the moment, the attention. He was the architect, the mastermind, and he would let no one diminish his glory. He looked directly at the reporter, his gray eyes glinting with a self-satisfied pride that bordered on arrogance. He drew a deep breath, filling his lungs with the air of triumph. My success, every single inch of it, is entirely my own making, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute certainty, completely unaware of the intricate dominoes Eleanor was setting in motion. The city lights glittered below, indifferent to the quiet storm within Vance Enterprises. Eleanor sat in her private office, the panoramic view a stark contrast to the knot in her stomach. The reports on her desk, filled with numbers, felt cold beneath her fingertips. They detailed Alexander's lavish spending, his escalating personal indulgences. Each line item reminded her of his disregard for anything beyond his desires. She traced a finger over a sum for a yacht Alexander hardly ever used. The ventilation hum vibrated with her disappointment, and a bitter taste settled in her mouth. She remembered an earlier Alexander, his eyes bright with genuine appreciation she rarely saw now. That man felt like a phantom, a whisper from a life gone. Thomas Thorne sat opposite her, his silver hair catching the light, his expression a blend of concern and steady wisdom. He gave her space to absorb the data. Her knuckles whitened on the desk edge. The reports showed Alexander was not just ambitious, he was reckless, driven by a hunger consuming their shared future. His analysts called his investments speculative, far riskier than his firm suggested. They were gambles on volatile markets, fueled by his belief in his judgment. Each highlighted paragraph tore at the financial security she had woven around them. She had guided his potential, but this Alexander was untethered, convinced of his invincibility. Ice clinked in her water glass. Eleanor finally looked at Thomas. Her calm blue eyes now held a steely glint, a resolve forged by his dismissals and her pain. He is burning through capital at an alarming rate, she stated, her voice quiet but firm. His investments are nothing more than glorified bets. Thomas nodded slowly. Indeed, Eleanor. His advisors grow nervous. They recognize patterns of a man overreaching, mistaking luck for genius. He shifted in his seat. The current merger will not cover these losses if his ventures collapse. Alexander saw the merger as his triumph, unaware Eleanor's planning made it possible. Eleanor thought of the silver locket against her skin, a tangible link to her grandmother and the values that built Vance Enterprises. Alexander's world of ostentatious displays and gambles felt distant from that foundation. A deep sigh escaped her lips, a mix of disappointment and grim acceptance. Letting him falter had been painful, a wound to her idealism. Now it felt necessary. Thomas, she began, her voice carefully modulated. We need to begin the process. Her gaze drifted back to the cityscape. She was about to tug on invisible threads of power. His company, Sterling Innovations, relies on several indirect lines of credit, backed by Vance Enterprises. It is time we start withdrawing that support. Thomas's pen clicked softly as he uncapped it. He had anticipated this, knowing Eleanor's strategic mind. Gradually, I presume, he asked, his voice low. He understood they needed a gradual unraveling, a consequence of Alexander's judgment. Gradually, yes, Eleanor confirmed, her eyes on the horizon, a faint sorrow etched around them. And subtly, no sudden movements. I want his financial team to scratch their heads, to search for phantom problems, to attribute it to administrative errors or market fluctuations. She wanted him to doubt his system, to question the foundations he believed he had built alone. The bitter taste of coffee deepened as she imagined his frustration. We will reduce the availability of those credit lines by small percentages each week, she continued. Delay processing on certain intercompany transfers. Impose stricter conditions on new capital injections. Nothing overt, nothing screaming Vance Enterprises was pulling the plug. She pictured the intricate web Vance Enterprises used to invisibly channel funds into Sterling Innovations. It was a complex dance. The goal is to tighten the noose almost imperceptibly, Thomas observed, making a note. He understood this was a strategic siege, not a direct assault. City traffic sounded like a low hum of impending doom for Alexander. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. I want him to feel the pressure, to wonder why his cash flow is not as fluid, to question his financial projections. She wanted to plant doubt, to watch his confidence erode. This was not revenge. It was a rebalancing, a reclaiming, and a painful lesson for him. The Vance Enterprises seal ring, a dark metal with the VE emblem, was her true anchor, not Alexander's diamonds or their opulent manner. It will require meticulous coordination, Thomas, Eleanor stated, her voice calm. Every step must be logged, every transaction masked. We cannot leave a trace pointing back to us directly. She knew Alexander's ruthlessness. If he suspected interference, he would lash out, destroying everything. This had to be surgical and deniable. Thomas closed his notebook. Consider it done, Eleanor. We will begin immediately. His eyes held quiet admiration for her resolve, for her strength despite personal betrayal. He had seen Eleanor grow from a quiet girl into a formidable woman, knowing Alexander underestimated her. Eleanor leaned back in her chair. The first domino was set. A subtle tremor would ripple through Alexander's world. She felt no joy, only inevitability. This was a necessary correction, a painful disentanglement. The quiet office, filled with the soft hum of technology, seemed to hold its breath. Across town, Alexander Sterling sat hunched over his ornate desk, his face a mask of irritation. The silence was broken by his CFO's frantic keyboard tapping. David, his chief financial officer, usually unflappable, looked flustered, his brow furrowed, his hair disheveled. Alexander ran a hand through his coiffed hair, his expensive cologne now seeming cloying. He had been poring over Sterling Innovation's financial reports, and something was off. Not catastrophically, but persistently, annoyingly off. Small discrepancies, delayed payments, and increased count for short-term capital. Are you telling me, David, Alexander said, his voice clipped, that you cannot identify the source of these fluctuations? He gestured vaguely at the screen David scrolled through, glowing green and red numbers. Alexander preferred the big picture, the grand narratives. David's hand trembled faintly. Sir, we've checked every ledger. It seems a confluence of minor issues. Key receivables are delayed, some lenders tighten terms, and there's an inexplicable drag on our working capital. He pushed his glasses up, his eyes darting nervously. Individually, they are insignificant. Collectively, they create a bottleneck. Alexander scoffed, leaning back in his chair, a glint of his watch catching the light. Bottleneck? David, we are on the verge of the biggest merger. My reputation, our company's future, will be cemented. These are administrative glitches, petty distractions. He believed in his will, his charisma, his genius. These annoyances felt like gnats buzzing around a lion. We've seen similar patterns in the past, sir, David ventured cautiously, usually when market conditions are uncertain or when a larger financial partner is restructuring their portfolio. He tried to articulate his concern without accusing Alexander of poor management. These issues were not normal for Sterling Innovations. Alexander slammed his fist on the desk, a muted thud that made David jump. Nonsense, David. Our market conditions are buoyant. We are ascendant. Sterling Innovations stands on its own 2 feet. His arrogance was thick. He believed every success was his effort. An unseen hand was anathema to his ego. He stood, pacing his office, his shoes silent on the rug. His mind was on the gala, the speeches, the adulation. These financial issues were a blot on his perfect landscape. This is unacceptable. We have projections to meet, a deal to close. I need liquid assets, not excuses. He gave David a cold, dismissive stare. This has to be fixed, immediately. David swallowed, his throat dry. He knew something was wrong but could not pinpoint it. It was like catching smoke. Every discrepancy resolved or reappeared elsewhere. It was insidious, like a slow leak. I will redouble our efforts, sir, David mumbled, imagining sleepless nights. He knew Alexander would brook no failure, especially now. Alexander stopped pacing, his gaze fixed on the cityscape outside his window, his reflection over the buildings. He saw a titan, a conqueror. He could not afford these snags in his perfect narrative. The gala was his moment, his public coronation. Nothing could mar it. He turned back to David, his eyes blazing with impatient fury. "Fix this immediately, David," Alexander snapped, his voice sharp. "The gala is too important for such petty distractions." The heavy cream envelopes, sealed with a bespoke wax emblem, began to land on polished marble tables and antique silver trays across the city. Each invitation, meticulously addressed, carried the unmistakable scent of old money and impending grandeur. They heralded Alexander Sterling's most anticipated event, his Gala of Galas, a public declaration of his unparalleled success. Every influential name appeared on those envelopes, except one. Eleanor Vance's name was notably absent from the guest list, a deliberate, quiet exclusion that resonated through the city's social circles. Alexander watched the buzz with a deep, satisfying hum in his chest. He saw the social media posts, the breathless whispers among the elite. His image, his carefully curated persona, was flawless. He had made it clear to anyone who would listen, and to those who merely observed, that his wife was not part of his public narrative. He had dismissed her presence as a potential distraction, a quaint accessory that would detract from the sharp, modern edge he projected. His own reflection in the towering windows of Sterling Manor showed him a man of unyielding ambition, a titan. The slight, almost imperceptible quiver of satisfaction in his jaw was his alone. He felt a surge of pride, a confirmation that every one of his choices, however ruthless, served his ultimate vision. The gala was not merely a celebration of a merger, it was his coronation. He envisioned the applause, the hushed admiration, the validation of his singular genius, all untainted by the shadow of a simple woman. He was Alexander Sterling, self-made king. Across town, Eleanor sat in her sun-drenched study, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She had seen the society pages, noted the subtle omission of her name. A memory flickered, sharp and cold. Alexander's dismissive hand gesture, his voice like ice as he told his assistant she would not be attending. Then his words to her, how her quiet nature would lessen his impact. A familiar ache tightened in her chest, a ghost of the deep, silent humiliation she had endured for too long. But this time it was different. This time his cruel exclusion was merely another step in her intricate design. The quiet acceptance she now felt was not resignation, but a profound understanding of her husband's blindness, his tragic underestimation. Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, at her customary Tuesday luncheon, tapped a perfectly manicured nail on her invitation. "Such a pity about poor Eleanor," she murmured to her companion, Lady Clara, her voice a practiced blend of sympathy and gleeful gossip. "Alexander certainly has a very specific vision for his public persona, one can only imagine." Clara nodded sagely, taking a delicate sip of tea. "Indeed, a man of his stature needs a certain presentation." They both subtly implied Eleanor was not that presentation, a notion Alexander himself had carefully cultivated. Eleanor, in her quiet corner, knew these conversations were happening. She understood the perception, the narrative Alexander had crafted. Let them talk, she thought. Let them believe the easy story. The harder truth would soon shatter their comfortable assumptions. Days later, within the hushed, minimalist elegance of Vance Enterprises headquarters, a different kind of invitation arrived. It did not bear the name of any socialite. It was delivered with a solemnity reserved for state documents, its weight substantial in the hand of the executive assistant. The heavy cream cardstock was embossed, not with Alexander's personal seal, but with the intricate, stylized VE emblem of Vance Enterprises itself. The recipient line was strikingly brief, almost deferential, the esteemed head of Vance Enterprises. The assistant, a young woman named Sarah, known for her impeccable discretion, carried it directly to Eleanor's private office. The air in the office was cool and still, the only sound the soft whir of the city outside the panoramic windows. Eleanor looked up from a complex financial report, her blue eyes sharp. Sarah placed the invitation on the vast, polished mahogany desk, her movements precise. "This arrived for you, Miss Vance. It seems rather important." Eleanor picked it up, her fingers tracing the raised emblem. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. This was not a social invitation, a casual summons to an event. This was a formal acknowledgement, a secret handshake from the very institution that was Alexander's silent partner. It was a formal summons to her own stage, her grand reveal. She felt a ripple of anticipation, a deep satisfaction spreading through her. This invitation, unlike the thousands Alexander had sent, acknowledged her true position, her unseen power. She placed it beside a stack of reports detailing Alexander's most recent ill-advised investment, the irony not lost on her. The world was shifting, quietly, subtly, according to her plan. Thomas Thorne, ever observant, entered her office moments later, a stack of urgent documents in his hand. He paused, his gaze falling on the distinctive invitation. A knowing nod passed between them, a silent understanding of the game they were playing. "It seems," Thomas began, his voice a low, thoughtful rumble, "they are expecting a very specific individual to grace their presence." Eleanor simply inclined her head. "Indeed, Thomas, and we must ensure she makes the appropriate impression." Her eyes held a flicker of something new, a steely resolve that deepened their blue. This was not just business, it was personal, profoundly so. The quiet woman was preparing to step into the light. The transformation began not in a bustling salon, but in a discreet private suite within the upper floors of Vance Enterprises, secured and shielded from prying eyes. Eleanor had chosen a world-renowned stylist, a woman named Genevieve, known for her ability to sculpt an image with quiet precision. Genevieve moved with the grace of an artist, her hands light and knowing. The suite itself was minimalist, designed for functionality, yet it held an air of hushed luxury. Mirrors lined one wall, reflecting the soft, diffused light. Eleanor sat before the largest mirror, a sense of quiet unreality settling over her. She was accustomed to understated elegance, to clothes that blended, that allowed her to observe unseen. Now she was to be seen, truly seen, for the first time in her public life. Genevieve began with her hair, long and dark, usually tied back simply. The stylist's fingers worked with practiced ease, creating a sophisticated frame for Eleanor's face, a style that spoke of understated power, of authority. The scent of high-quality styling products filled the air, mingling with the subtle aroma of expensive fabric. Eleanor felt the gentle pull, the careful shaping, as if a sculptor were at work. Her inner voice was a quiet hum, a running commentary on the process. "This is not vanity," she told herself. "This is strategy. Every strand, every line is a declaration." She remembered Alexander's words, his disdain for her perceived simplicity. He had wanted her to be a blank canvas, easily overlooked, a quiet shadow to his brilliance. But she was no shadow. She was the sun around which his world had unknowingly revolved. The thought brought a fierce, cold satisfaction. Next came the makeup. Genevieve worked meticulously, enhancing Eleanor's features without transforming them into something artificial. Her piercing blue eyes, often softened by her quiet demeanor, were given a subtle intensity. Her lips, usually unadorned, were painted a deep, confident shade. Each brushstroke felt like a layer of armor, a shield against the world that had dismissed her. Eleanor felt the cool touch of creams, the soft sweep of brushes, the meticulous blending. She studied her reflection, seeing not a stranger, but a sharpened, refined version of herself, ready for battle. Throughout these sessions, a small, discreet security detail remained on standby. They were part of Vance Enterprises' permanent protection for its head, a silent acknowledgement of her importance, always present but rarely seen. Their quiet efficiency reinforced the gravity of the occasion, the seriousness of the transformation. They moved like shadows, their presence a constant, reassuring hum in the background. The dress fittings were the most profound part of this metamorphosis. Genevieve had presented several sketches, but only one had resonated with Eleanor. It was a gown of deep emerald silk, a color that would make her eyes blaze, its lines clean, elegant, yet undeniably commanding. The fabric flowed like liquid, hugging her frame with exquisite precision, then cascading into a dramatic sweeping train. When she first tried it on, the cool silk felt alien against her skin, so different from the comfortable, unassuming clothes she usually wore. It was heavy, substantial, a garment of immense presence. She stood before the mirror, turning slowly, the fabric rustling softly around her. It was not merely beautiful. It was a statement, a challenge. The cut emphasized her strength, The subtle shimmer of the silk caught the light, creating an aura of effortless power. This was not a dress designed to make her look pretty. It was designed to make her look powerful, unassailable. She remembered the simple silver locket around her neck, a constant, comforting weight that connected her to her true self, her grandmother's strength. This gown, in its opulence, was the outward manifestation of that inner fortitude. The final fitting brought a culmination of all the efforts. Genevieve stood back, her expression one of quiet triumph. The gown fit as though it had been poured onto Eleanor's form. It was a second skin, a declaration. Eleanor gazed at her reflection, seeing the woman Alexander had cast aside, now meticulously sculpted, polished, and ready. Her eyes, framed by the artful makeup and sophisticated hairstyle, held a deep, unshakable resolve. The subtle shimmer of the emerald silk seemed to catch a hidden fire. She felt a profound shift within her, a shedding of the old, a full embrace of the new. A faint, determined, almost predatory smile graced her lips. The scent of polished wood and expensive triumph filled Alexander Sterling's private study, a grand chamber at the heart of Sterling Manor. He stood before a towering, gilded mirror, his reflection a portrait of impeccable ambition, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that whispered of European craftsmanship. He adjusted the knot of his silk tie, his gaze sharp and critical, not of his appearance but of the man staring back. He saw a titan, a visionary, a man on the precipice of an empire. He saw himself, his fingers clenched, then relaxed, practicing a gesture he would use on stage, a subtle sweep of the hand meant to convey both humility and ultimate command. The speech, carefully crafted and rehearsed countless times, flowed from his lips with an easy confidence, each word a testament to his perceived genius. He spoke of foresight, of resilience, of the arduous journey to build something truly magnificent from nothing. He believed every syllable. He had built this, brick by painstaking brick, with his own two hands, his own brilliant mind. This merger, this crowning achievement, was his alone. A flicker of a smile touched his lips, a self-satisfied curve that held no warmth. He thought of Eleanor, tucked away in her quiet wing of the house, perhaps tending her small garden, or reading one of her simple books. She would never understand the intricate dance of power, the cutthroat world where legacies were forged and empires expanded. Her simplicity, which he had once found quaint, had become a dull weight, a shadow he was eager to shed. He imagined the gala, a glittering spectacle of the city's elite, and felt a surge of relief that she would not be there to dilute his perfect image. Her presence would be like a mismatched button on a bespoke suit, an unnecessary flaw in his meticulously curated presentation. He repeated a particularly impactful line, his voice resonating with carefully modulated authority, the grand words echoing in the vast, empty room. His eyes, keen and gray, saw only the dazzling future he had meticulously constructed for himself. Miles away, amidst the clinking of crystal and the hushed symphony of polite laughter, Lady Beatrice Ainsworth leaned forward, her pearls shimmering against the silk of her dress. The pre-gala luncheon at the exclusive Astor Club was in full swing, a gathering of the city's most prominent socialites, each vying for the latest morsel of gossip. The air hung thick with the perfume of exotic lilies and the faint aroma of truffle oil. Lady Beatrice, ever the queen of the rumor mill, savored her chilled consommé before delivering her latest pronouncement. "And can you believe," she purred, her voice a theatrical whisper that somehow carried across the table, "Alexander Sterling is holding his grand merger gala without his wife." She paused for dramatic effect, her sharp green eyes sweeping over the faces of her companions, relishing their collective intake of breath. Such a shame, really, poor Eleanor, always so subdued. A ripple of agreement went through the group. Penelope Davies, known for her equally sharp tongue, chimed in, "Well, you know how Alexander is, always so concerned with appearances. Eleanor is a lovely woman, of course, but perhaps not quite the splash he needs for such an occasion." Lady Beatrice offered a delicate, knowing smile. "Precisely, but the real buzz, my dears, is about the mysterious guest of honor, the head of Vance Enterprises. They say this individual is incredibly powerful, utterly private, and has never once revealed their face to the public." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger against her chin. Imagine, all this time pulling the strings, yet completely unseen. A true puppet master. Eleanor Vance, seated in her minimalist, glass-walled office high above the city, felt the quiet hum of Vance Enterprises' headquarters beneath her. The panoramic view stretched endlessly, a tapestry of steel and glass, a testament to the empire she commanded. She cradled a warm ceramic mug in her hands, the scent of black coffee a familiar comfort. Thomas Thorne sat opposite her, his silver hair gleaming in the afternoon light, a stack of meticulously organized folders before him. His presence was a steady anchor in the swirling currents of her thoughts. "The timing is set, Eleanor," Thomas said, his voice calm and precise. He pushed a tablet across the polished surface of the table. "Your entrance at precisely 9 o'clock. Alexander will have just begun his speech, likely reaching the part where he congratulates himself on his extraordinary vision." A faint, almost imperceptible wryness touched Thomas's lips, his moment of perceived triumph. Eleanor's gaze drifted from the city below to the digital document on the screen. It outlined the precise legal and financial steps, the communication strategy, the carefully orchestrated unveiling. Each point was a hammer blow, meticulously aimed, designed to dismantle Alexander's carefully constructed illusion. She felt a tremor in her hand, not of fear, but of the immense weight of what she was about to do. This was not merely a business transaction. It was the reclamation of her life, her dignity, her very self. She remembered Alexander's words, sharp and dismissive, echoing in the quiet elegance of their bedroom. "Your presence would detract." Those words had sliced through her, leaving a wound that had festered in the silence of her days. He had seen her as an ornament, a simple backdrop, easily discarded when she no longer served his grand narrative. The quiet pain of that realization had sharpened her resolve, honed her focus. She had spent years allowing him to believe he was the master of his own destiny, the architect of his fortune, while she, unseen, had provided every single pillar of his success. The injustice of it, the cold calculation of his dismissiveness, had fueled her. "And the media package?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady, betraying none of the deep currents of emotions swirling within her. She had learned to compartmentalize her feelings, to separate the strategic mind from the aching heart. "Prepared. A full biography highlighting your philanthropic work, your family legacy, and your quiet but powerful leadership of Vance Enterprises for the past decade and a half," Thomas confirmed. "It paints a picture, Eleanor, a true picture, one the world has yet to see." He watched her, his wise eyes full of understanding. He had seen her through the years of silent sacrifice, and now the brink of her emergence. He knew the cost of this victory would be immense, not just for Alexander, but for her as well. Eleanor thought of her grandmother, the faded photograph tucked into the silver locket she wore beneath her shirt. Her grandmother, with her quiet strength, her unwavering belief in integrity, had built the foundation of Vance Enterprises, brick by honest brick. Eleanor had inherited not just a fortune, but a legacy, a responsibility she took with profound seriousness. Alexander had trampled on that legacy, blinded by his own hubris, convinced he was entitled to everything without truly understanding its source. The thought of exposing his deception, of revealing the intricate web she had woven, brought a strange mix of dread and fierce satisfaction. "And Alexander's reaction?" she murmured, almost to herself. She knew it would be shattering. She had once loved him, or at least the man she thought he was, the man he had pretended to be before ambition had consumed him entirely. Now there was only the cold, calculating CEO, the man who had dismissed her as simple. Thomas sighed, a soft, almost inaudible sound. "It will be significant, public, the unraveling of his entire narrative." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle. "Are you ready for that, Eleanor? For the world to see him for what he truly is, and for you to step into the glare?" She took a slow, deep breath, the scent of her coffee grounding her. "I have been ready for a very long time, Thomas." Her blue eyes, usually holding a hidden depth, now gleamed with a clear, unwavering resolve. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, not the grand entrance, but the quiet internal decision to finally stand for herself. The quiet girl who had once believed in Alexander's manufactured charm was gone. In her place stood a woman forged in the fires of betrayal and silent strength, ready to claim what was rightfully hers. The city lights began to twinkle outside the window, a premature scattering of diamonds against the twilight sky. The hum of the building seemed to intensify, a symphony of latent power. Eleanor felt a tremor again, a physical manifestation of the tectonic plates shifting beneath her life. There would be no turning back after tonight. Her quiet existence, her carefully guarded privacy, would be shattered. But with its shattering would come freedom. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-covered box. Its deep, rich color absorbed the office light, hinting at the treasure within. He placed it gently on the table between them, his eyes twinkling with a mixture of pride, anticipation, and a touch of the dramatic flair he usually reserved for high-stakes negotiations. It's time for them to see who truly holds the reins, Eleanor. The grand imperial ballroom shimmered under the weight of 1,000 glittering crystal chandeliers. Each facet caught the light, scattering it across polished marble floors, where the city's elite moved like pieces in a meticulously choreographed dance. A symphony of hushed conversations, the delicate clinking of champagne flutes, and the soft rustle of silk and wool filled the vast space. The air itself felt thick with anticipation, carrying the faint scent of exotic lilies and expensive cologne. Every eye, it seemed, held a spark of curiosity, a silent assessment of status and power, all converging on Alexander Sterling, the evening's undisputed centerpiece. Alexander navigated the throng with an almost predatory grace, a practiced smile fixed firmly upon his face. His tailored suit, a dark, rich midnight blue, seemed to absorb the light around him, making him appear both distinguished and formidable. He extended a hand here, offered a charming chuckle there, his gray eyes sweeping over the faces, cataloging every nod of approval, every whisper of admiration. He saw not just individuals, but reflections of his own success, affirmations of the empire he had so meticulously built. Each handshake was a reaffirmation, each compliment a note in the triumphant anthem playing in his mind. He savored the weight of their attention, feeling it settle upon him like a king's heavy jeweled crown. He paused to exchange a few words with Jonathan Hayes, the notoriously shrewd head of a rival investment firm. Jonathan's grin was tight, a mixture of envy and reluctant respect. "Alexander," Jonathan said, his voice a low rumble, "you've truly outdone yourself this time. This merger is a masterstroke." Alexander inclined his head, a gesture of false modesty. "Just good business, Jonathan," he replied, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He felt a surge of adrenaline, the sweet taste of victory on his tongue. This was what he lived for, this validation, this public acknowledgement of his unparalleled brilliance. He had worked tirelessly, sacrificed everything, and now, finally, the world was giving him his due. A flash of platinum blonde hair caught his eye across the room. It was Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, draped in emeralds, her sharp green eyes observing him with an almost clinical intensity. He offered her a polite, distant nod. He knew her kind. They thrived on gossip and speculation, always looking for a crack in the facade. But tonight there were no cracks, only the gleaming, unblemished surface of his triumph. He felt invincible, a colossus bestriding his world. The minor financial hitches from weeks ago now seemed like distant, forgettable whispers, easily overcome by his sheer will and strategic genius. He had dismissed his CFO's concerns then, and he was right to do so. Such small matters were beneath him. He pictured his office, high above the city, a testament to his ambition. He remembered the long nights, the relentless negotiations, the moments of doubt he had ruthlessly crushed. He saw himself as a self-made man, a titan forged in the fires of relentless ambition. Every success, every opulent possession, every inch of power he held, he genuinely believed, was the fruit of his own relentless labor, his own unparalleled vision. He had no silent partners, no hidden benefactors. He had only himself, his drive, and his unwavering belief in his own extraordinary capabilities. A discreet signal from the event coordinator caught his attention. It was time. A ripple of heightened anticipation swept through the ballroom. Alexander took a deep breath, letting the adoration of the crowd wash over him. He felt the plush carpet beneath his expensive leather shoes as he moved toward the elevated stage, a platform designed for moments exactly like this one. Each step was deliberate, a slow ascent into his carefully constructed spotlight. He felt the warmth of the lights on his face, the silent reverence of the hundreds of eyes fixed upon him. This was not just a speech, it was a coronation. He reached the center of the stage, the bright spotlight narrowing to encompass only him. A hush, more profound than before, descended upon the ballroom. The clinking of glasses ceased. Conversations died. Every sound seemed to fade, replaced by the beating of his own heart, a strong, rhythmic drum in his chest. He surveyed the faces below him, a sea of expectant gazes. He saw old money, new money, power brokers, media moguls, and the silent, hungry ambition of those who wished to emulate him. They were all here for him, to witness his crowning achievement. Alexander allowed a slow, confident smile to spread across his face. He adjusted the microphone, a barely perceptible gesture, but one that signaled his command of the moment. He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting the anticipation build to an almost unbearable pitch. He could taste the victory, feel the palpable energy of admiration radiating from the crowd. He was truly truly alone on that stage, yet completely connected to every single person in the room through the invisible threads of his power and their collective recognition of it. He felt the weight of the Vance Enterprises merger documents, neatly folded in his inner jacket pocket, a physical manifestation of his ultimate conquest. He began to speak, his voice resonating through the ballroom, amplified and perfectly modulated. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he boomed, his words ringing with self-congratulatory pride. He watched the slight nods, the attentive expressions, the way people leaned forward, eager to catch every syllable. "Tonight," he continued, his voice swelling with emotion, "we celebrate not just a merger, but a vision realized. A future forged through tireless dedication, strategic foresight, and an unwavering commitment to excellence." He felt a thrill course through him, a pure, unadulterated joy in his own achievement. This was his moment, earned and deserved. He spoke of the countless hours, the calculated risks, the bold decisions that had led to this monumental achievement. His gestures were expansive, confident, sweeping across the room, as if to embrace every corner of his newly expanded empire. "Some might have doubted," he declared, his gaze hardening slightly. "Some might have questioned the audacity of our ambitions. But true greatness, I have always believed, is born from the courage to push beyond perceived limits." He remembered the quiet, often ignored insights Eleanor had sometimes offered, and a faint, almost imperceptible scoff escaped him. How quaint those simple observations now seemed, utterly irrelevant to the grand tapestry he had woven. He spoke of his team, praising their dedication, but always subtly positioning himself as the singular architect, the guiding genius behind every success. "I stand before you tonight," he announced, his voice reaching a crescendo, "not merely as a CEO, but as a steward of progress, a builder of futures, and a testament to what unwavering resolve can achieve." He paused, letting the words hang in the air, allowing their full weight to settle upon the audience. He saw a few people glance towards the main entrance, perhaps anticipating a late arrival, but he quickly dismissed the thought. All eyes belonged to him. He felt the familiar surge of power, a heady mix of adrenaline and profound satisfaction. His mind raced, already planning the next conquest, the next strategic move to solidify his position at the very pinnacle of his world. He was untouchable, unassailable, a force of nature in the corporate landscape. This gala was merely the official seal on an empire he had personally carved out of sheer will and intellect. He had conquered. He had triumphed. The path ahead stretched clear and wide, paved with gold and endless possibilities. He was at the absolute zenith of his career, and he knew it. He could feel it in his bones, taste it on his tongue, see it reflected in every admiring gaze. "This merger," he proclaimed, his voice booming with absolute certainty, "is a new dawn, not just for Vance Enterprises, but for the entire industry. It represents innovation, growth, and a relentless pursuit of excellence that I personally champion. He gestured with his open palm, as if presenting a magnificent gift to the world, a gift he had crafted entirely by himself. His chest swelled with pride, his eyes gleaming with the light of his perceived ultimate triumph. He was the master of his universe, and everyone in this opulent room knew it. The entire world, he believed, was now at his feet. A sudden, inexplicable hush falls over the entire ballroom as the massive, ornate grand doors swing open with a soft creak, revealing a figure silhouetted against the bright lights from the corridor. The massive, ornate grand doors swung open with a soft, resonant creak. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright, almost blinding lights from the corridor beyond. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. The air in the grand imperial ballroom, previously thick with the hum of conversation and the clinking of crystal, became completely still. Every head turned as one, drawn by the unexpected interruption. The collective breath held, a silent question hanging in the glittering, expectant space. Then she stepped forward, each deliberate movement a carefully choreographed statement. Eleanor Vance moved with an unhurried grace, her exquisite gown shimmering like liquid midnight under the vast chandeliers. The fabric, a deep sapphire velvet, flowed around her, catching the light with every subtle shift of her body. It was a gown that spoke of quiet power, not overt display, yet it commanded every eye in the room. Her dark hair, usually pinned in a simple style, was now swept up, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Diamonds, subtle and perfectly placed, sparkled at her throat and wrists, catching fire in the ballroom's glow. Her eyes, usually downcast or politely reserved, now held a fierce, unwavering light. They swept across the room, taking in the sea of shocked faces, the sudden silence, the arrested gestures of the city's elite. A faint, almost imperceptible scent of jasmine, her signature fragrance, drifted through the stunned crowd. It was a scent Alexander had once called quaint, too simple for his extravagant taste. Now it was a fragrant declaration of her arrival, a subtle, sensory assault on his carefully constructed world. Her left hand, elegant and unadorned except for a single heavy ring, was raised slightly as she took her first steps onto the polished marble. The Vance Enterprises seal ring, crafted from dark, ancient-looking metal, gleamed on her finger. Its intricate, stylized VE emblem was unmistakable, a symbol known only in hushed, reverent tones among the true power brokers. It was the mark of the mysterious, elusive head of a conglomerate whose reach touched every corner of the global economy. The ring itself felt cool and solid against her skin, a tangible anchor to the weight of her identity, a counterweight to the years of invisibility. A collective gasp, soft yet undeniably present, rippled through the crowd. It started near the doors, a wave of recognition spreading outwards, washing over the stunned guests. Whispers, like a sudden gust of wind, began to rustle through the silence. Is that... No, it can't be. The head of Vance Enterprises. Tonight. But she's a woman? The murmurs escalated, growing louder, more urgent, tinged with disbelief and awe. Faces, moments ago composed and politely smiling, twisted into expressions of genuine shock. Some people instinctively clutched their champagne flutes, their knuckles white. Others simply stared, mouths slightly agape. Eleanor felt the weight of their gaze, the sudden shift in the room's energy. It was a tangible thing, a pressure that would have crushed her once. But tonight it fueled her. Each step was a quiet victory, a reclaiming of herself from the shadows where Alexander had so carelessly cast her. She saw Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, eyes wide, a half-eaten canapé forgotten in her hand, staring with an expression that was a potent mix of astonishment and dawning, malicious delight. Eleanor offered the socialite a small, knowing nod, a subtle acknowledgement that this night belonged to her. Alexander Sterling, still standing on the elevated stage, mid-sentence in his self-congratulatory speech, froze. His triumphant smile, so carefully cultivated, so smugly practiced, dissolved slowly, like sugar in hot tea. The words, "And together we will forge a new era of unparalleled prosperity," died on his lips, swallowed by the sudden, deafening silence of the room. His eyes, initially scanning the back of the ballroom in mild annoyance at the interruption, widened almost imperceptibly. He saw the gown first, then the way she carried herself, with that quiet authority he had always dismissed as mere reserve. Then he saw the profile, the sweep of dark hair, the delicate curve of her the way the light caught the diamonds. A cold, suffocating dread began to curl in his stomach. It was impossible. It had to be. This was his night, his triumph, his moment. There could be no rivals, no unexpected figures stealing his spotlight. But then she turned her head fully, her gaze sweeping towards the stage, towards him. The full force of her presence hit him like a physical blow. The piercing blue eyes, the ones he had always considered beautiful but meek, now held an intensity that made his blood run cold. They were not meek eyes. They were the eyes of a strategist, a queen, an empress. And then he saw it glimmering on her left hand, the heavy, dark metal ring. The Vance Enterprises seal. The air in his lungs seemed to vanish, leaving him gasping silently. The dawning horror on his face was a grotesque parody of his earlier triumph. His carefully chiseled features slackened, his jaw going slack, betraying the raw, unvarnished fear that was seizing him. This was not just a woman. This was Eleanor, his simple wife, the woman he had banished from his gala, the woman he had scorned and dismissed as lacking ambition, as a mere accessory. His mind raced, a frantic, desperate scramble for explanations. It was a mistake, a hallucination, a cruel, elaborate joke. But the hush of the crowd, the shock on every face, the undeniable glint of the ring all screamed one terrifying truth. This mysterious, powerful figure, the elusive head of the empire that had silently backed his entire career, the architect of his unspoken success, was Eleanor. His Eleanor. A cold sweat broke out on his brow, trickling down his temples. The spotlight, which moments ago had felt like a warm embrace, now burned him, exposing his utter foolishness, his monumental ignorance. He could hear the whispers now, no longer a distant murmur, but a rising tide washing over him, dissecting him. The name Vance was repeated again and again, now inextricably linked with Eleanor. The truth was an open wound, gaping and raw for all the world to see. He tried to speak, to utter the words of his speech, but his throat was dry, constricted. His tongue felt thick and useless. The carefully constructed facade of his success, his power, his very identity, began to crack and splinter around him. Every arrogant word he had ever spoken to her, every dismissive wave of his hand, every contemptuous thought he had harbored about her quiet nature, now echoed in his mind, sharp and biting. He felt like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly cut, collapsing in full view of his audience. Eleanor continued her slow, deliberate walk, her gaze never leaving him. Her lips were set in a firm, almost imperceptible line. There was no anger there, no theatrical fury, only a profound, chilling resolve. The pain he had inflicted, the quiet years of her invisibility, the humiliation of being deemed simple and irrelevant, all of it coalesced into this single potent moment. This was not merely an entrance. It was an execution of his false reality. He watched her approach, a silent, beautiful predator. Each step she took seemed to chip away another piece of his carefully constructed world. The warmth of the ballroom faded, replaced by an icy dread that permeated his very bones. He saw the recognition in the eyes of the guests, the way they were already shifting their attention, their loyalty towards her. His moment of triumph was not just stolen, it was obliterated, replaced by hers. The air thrummed with unspoken questions, with the heavy weight of a truth about to be revealed, a truth Alexander was only just beginning to grasp in its full, devastating magnitude. His breathing became shallow, ragged. His chest tightened, a vice clamping down on his heart. The elegant ball, the culmination of his ambition, had become his personal public execution. Eleanor reached the edge of the central walkway, a few feet from the stage, yet still far enough to maintain a clear, undeniable distance. She paused, her eyes, like shards of blue ice, locking onto his. Alexander's stunned, wide-eyed gaze met hers across the glittering ballroom. a silent, powerful challenge burning in her eyes, utterly devoid of her usual quiet deference. Alexander Sterling's world shattered into a million glittering fragments under the ballroom's opulent lights. Eleanor's eyes, once downcast, now held a fierce, unyielding challenge, reflecting the truth she had kept hidden for so long. The roar of his ambition, the thrum of his victory speech, all faded into a deafening silence within his mind. He felt the blood drain from his face, leaving a cold, clammy sensation on his skin, a stark contrast to the burning spotlights above. His carefully constructed smile had frozen, then crumpled, betraying a terror he had never imagined possible. The microphone still stood before him, a silent sentinel of his unraveling. His lips parted, but the words, so carefully rehearsed, had vanished like smoke. A single panicked thought echoed in his skull. This cannot be real. This cannot be happening. He clutched the podium, his knuckles white, the polished wood feeling strangely rough beneath his trembling fingers. He could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes, no longer admiring, but dissecting, judging. Each glance felt like a physical blow, stripping away his carefully cultivated facade. He tried to speak again, a desperate attempt to reclaim the narrative, to dismiss the impossible vision before him. As I was saying, he stamped, his voice a pathetic croak, utterly devoid of the booming confidence from moments before. The sound was thin, reedy, barely reaching beyond the first row of stunned faces. A ripple of whispers, like a sudden gust of wind, swept through the ballroom, carrying his humiliation on its current. He swallowed hard, the dryness in his throat making it difficult to breathe, a choking sensation rising from his chest. The sheer absurdity of the situation struck him with brutal force. His wife, his simple Eleanor, the woman he had dismissed, the woman he had told to stay home, was standing there, radiating an authority that eclipsed his own. The sight of the Vance Enterprises seal ring on her finger burned into his vision, a brand of his colossal error. Every decision he had made, every condescending glance, every patronizing word, now returned to him with the force of a tidal wave. He felt a profound, stomach-lurching nausea as if the very foundations of his existence were crumbling beneath his feet. He somehow managed to stammer through a few more disjointed sentences, a garbled string of business jargon and platitudes that made no sense even to his own ears. His posture, usually so commanding, had sagged, his shoulders hunched as if bearing an unbearable weight. His gaze flickered wildly, avoiding Eleanor's steady stare, darting instead to the familiar faces in the crowd, seeking some shred of reassurance, some sign that this was a terrible, collective hallucination. But their expressions offered no comfort, only a growing comprehension, a dawning realization of the drama unfolding before them. Meanwhile, Eleanor moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, each step a testament to years of suppressed strength. The gasp that had greeted her entrance still hung in the air, a palpable hum of shock and awe. She felt the sudden surge of power, not as a thrill, but as a profound sense of rightness, a quiet fulfillment of a long overdue destiny. Her heart beat a steady rhythm, calm and resolute, a stark contrast to the maelstrom she knew was consuming Alexander. She allowed herself a moment to absorb the collective attention, the complete shift in atmosphere before continuing her journey. Her eyes scanned the room, acknowledging faces she recognized from countless society pages and board meetings. Many of these powerful individuals had, in their own ways, either dismissed her or simply never noticed her at all. Now, their eyes were wide, some with naked curiosity, others with a dawning respect, a few with a hint of fear. They offered tentative nods, some rising slightly from their chairs, a silent acknowledgement of her unexpected arrival and undeniable presence. She returned their greetings with a small, composed smile, a subtle tilt of her head, her movements economical and precise. She knew precisely where her table was, a prominent position at the front, directly facing the stage. It had been prepared meticulously, a subtle detail ensuring her visibility, her place at the heart of this pivotal event. As she approached, a few senior executives from various companies, men and women who had politely tolerated Alexander's arrogance for years, subtly shifted their chairs, creating a small, welcoming space. They were astute observers of power, and the scent of its shift was now unmistakable. Eleanor settled into her seat with a quiet dignity, the rustle of her gown a soft whisper in the suddenly hushed room. She felt the heavy weight of the Vance Enterprises seal ring on her finger, a physical anchor to her identity. It was not a trophy, she thought, but a symbol of the responsibility she had always carried, now finally brought into the light. A profound weariness settled over her for a moment, the weight of years of silence and careful maneuvering. But beneath that, a clear, sharp sense of purpose remained, a feeling of finally being truly seen. From a nearby table, Lady Beatrice Ainsworth leaned conspiratorially toward her companion, Mr. Fitzwilliam, a prominent real estate mogul with a perpetually surprised expression. Her voice, usually a well-modulated purr, was now a sharp, almost breathless whisper. "My dear Fitzwilliam," she began, her perfectly manicured hand fluttering to her chest. "Did you ever, in your wildest dreams, imagine such a spectacle?" Her eyes, usually so calculating, were now wide with a mixture of shock and unadulterated delight. Mr. Fitzwilliam, a man known more for his financial acumen than his social graces, simply gurgled. He had spilled a considerable amount of champagne on his impeccably tailored suit, too stunned to notice or care. His jaw hung slightly agape, his gaze fixed on Eleanor, then flicking back to the mortified Alexander on stage. He seemed to be replaying every interaction he had ever had with either of them, desperately searching for clues he had surely missed. Lady Beatrice continued, oblivious to his discomfiture. "Eleanor Vance, of all people, the quiet mouse, the wallpaper wife, and now this." She gestured vaguely toward Eleanor with a gloved hand, her voice dropping to an even lower, more dramatic tone. An astonishing transformation, wouldn't you agree? From modest silk to pure, unadulterated power. Her eyes sparkled with an almost predatory glee, savoring every drop of the unfolding drama. "And Alexander," she breathed, a touch of genuine pity, quickly overshadowed by her love for gossip, entering her voice. "His face, darling. Did you see his face? The man is utterly humiliated, utterly, tragically, gloriously humiliated." A tiny, satisfied smile played on her lips. She had always found Alexander Sterling rather pompous, his self-importance grating. This public undoing was, for her, a delicious dessert after years of polite social endurance. She reached for her crystal glass, taking a slow, appreciative sip of champagne, the bubbles dancing on her tongue like tiny bursts of revelation. Alexander, meanwhile, stumbled through the final hollow words of his speech. The applause, if it could even be called that, was a scattered, weak thing, more a nervous cough than an ovation. He felt utterly exposed, as if the very fabric of his suit had become transparent, revealing his raw, quivering fear to the entire world. His vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer intensity of the light, the overwhelming sensory assault of his disgrace. He yearned for the solid, familiar ground of his office, the quiet solitude of his study, anywhere but this brightly lit stage. He descended the steps, his legs feeling like lead, each movement an effort of sheer will. He avoided Eleanor's table, avoiding her gaze, avoiding the truth that resided there. He felt the phantom pain of countless tiny needles pricking his skin, the sensation of invisible eyes following his every faltering step. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the shadows, to rewind time to an hour ago when he was still the undisputed king of this gilded jungle. But there was no escape, no turning back. He made his way to a secluded corner of the ballroom, near a large potted palm, hoping its broad leaves might offer some meager concealment. His breath hitched in his chest, a ragged, uneven sound. He pressed his palms against the cool marble wall, seeking a grounding that would not come. He could hear the low hum of conversation slowly resuming, but now it was different, punctuated by his name, by Eleanor's name, whispered with a new reverence, a new understanding. The very air had changed its composition, now thick with judgment in the delicious tang of scandal. From her table, Eleanor watched him, a complicated mix of emotions swirling within her. There was no triumph in his suffering, only a deep, abiding sadness for the man he once was, for the potential that ambition had so thoroughly corrupted. She had not sought to destroy him, only to reclaim what was hers, to assert her worth. Yet the collateral damage was undeniable. a stark consequence of his arrogance and her long-held secret. She felt the weight of her choices, the undeniable finality of this moment. She felt a gentle touch on her arm. Thomas Thorne stood beside her, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. He offered her a small, knowing smile, a silent acknowledgement of her victory, her strength. He had been a rock, a confidant, a steady presence through years of quiet planning. She returned his smile, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest, a rare moment of pure connection in this sea of performative grace. The ballroom, once a stage for Alexander's triumph, was now unequivocally hers. The spotlight, though no longer physically on her, seemed to emanate from her, drawing all eyes, all attention. She was no longer the silent partner, the underestimated wife. She was the architect, the owner, the true power behind the curtain, now stepping boldly into the light. She raised her head, her gaze sweeping across the room, meeting the eyes of those who now sought her attention, her approval. A prominent society journalist, a keen observer named Richard Hayes, worked swiftly through the throng. He knew a career-defining moment when he saw one. His camera clicked, its rapid succession of shutters a small, insistent drumbeat against the hum of the crowd. He captured Eleanor's face first, serene and composed, a quiet strength radiating from her piercing blue eyes. Her expression held a profound stillness, a deep well of emotion hidden beneath a mask of perfect control. Then his lens swiveled, seeking out Alexander in his corner. Another series of clicks, immortalizing Alexander Sterling's pale, bewildered face, his eyes wide and hollow, utterly defeated. The echo of Alexander's stumbling words still hung heavy in the air, a phantom of his collapsed triumph. Eleanor felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, a palpable pressure that would have once made her shrink, but now it merely settled like a comfortable cloak. She took a slow sip of the crisp, dry champagne, its chill a pleasant contrast to the warmth radiating from the velvet-lined table. A faint whisper of expensive perfume drifted past, mingling with the scent of white roses arranged in a crystal vase nearby. The murmur of the room, once a chaotic babble, had shifted into a low, speculative hum, a current of recalculation flowing through the elite gathering. Just as a waiter silently refilled her glass, a distinguished figure approached her table. Thomas Thorne, his silver hair gleaming under the grand chandeliers, offered her a small, knowing smile. He pulled out the chair beside her with an easy grace, settling in as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His presence was a subtle, yet undeniable reinforcement of her position. Every eye, Alexander's included, watched their quiet interaction, trying to decipher its meaning. Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction bloom within her chest, a gentle warmth that spread through her veins. This was not about vengeance, not entirely, but about reclaiming what was rightfully hers, about standing in her own truth. "Eleanor," Thomas began, his voice a low, measured tone that barely carried beyond their immediate space. "The initial reactions are precisely as we anticipated, a delightful cascade of surprise, followed by immediate recognition of true power." She met his gaze, her blue eyes clear and unwavering. "Surprise was merely the appetizer, Thomas. The main course is yet to come." Her voice was soft, barely audible above the din, yet it carried an underlying steel, a confidence Alexander had never heard before. She observed the ballroom, a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, a collection of faces now openly staring, whispering behind gloved hands. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a palpable shift in the social hierarchy. A chill, perhaps from an open door, touched her bare shoulders, but she did not shiver. Thomas leaned closer, his expression earnest. "The details of the merger announcement will proceed as planned, but with a slight public reordering of priority. Vance Enterprises will now be explicitly named as the primary driver, the architect of this entire endeavor." He placed a slim, leather-bound folder on the table between them, its pages filled with neat, formal script. The heavy paper felt cool beneath Eleanor's fingertips. She felt the subtle weight of her signet ring, the intricate VE emblem pressing against her skin, a constant, tangible reminder of her authority. Across the room, Alexander Sterling felt a raw, burning sensation spread through his chest, tightening his breath. He watched Eleanor sitting composed and regal, chatting with Thomas Thorne, as if the world had not just been turned upside down. His triumph, the culmination of years of relentless ambition, had evaporated like smoke. His mind reeled, trying to grasp the impossible reality unfolding before him. His Eleanor, his quiet, simple wife, the head of Vance Enterprises? It was a ludicrous thought, a cruel, elaborate joke. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The gasps, the whispers, the way every powerful figure in the room now gravitated towards her table, their gazes filled with a mixture of awe and respect. The rich, heady scent of his own success now smelled like ash. A desperate, primal urge to regain control surged through him. He had to confront her, to demand an explanation, to make sense of this devastating illusion. His legs felt heavy, yet he pushed himself forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. He moved with a speed born of panic, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, ignoring the curious, pitying glances that followed him. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, all faded into a dull roar in his ears. He needed to reach her, to pull her aside, to tear down this elaborate facade. As he closed the distance, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. He could almost taste the fear, sharp and metallic, in the back of his throat. He saw the corner of Eleanor's mouth twitch, a barely perceptible movement, as if she sensed his approach without even looking up. Before he could utter a single word, a tall, impeccably dressed man in a dark suit, who had been standing discreetly a few feet from Eleanor's table, stepped forward. The man's posture was firm, his expression polite but unyielding. "Mr. Sterling," the security detail said, his voice calm and even, a low rumble that cut through Alexander's rising panic. "Perhaps a moment later, Miss Vance is currently engaged in a private discussion." Alexander felt a jolt, a sudden cold shock. He bristled, his face flushing crimson. "I'm her husband," he snapped, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained, his hand clenched into a fist, the silk of his cufflink digging into his palm. He could feel the heat on his cheeks, the burning humiliation intensified by the security guard's impassive gaze and the sudden, acute attention from those nearby. The air around him suddenly felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken judgment. The security man's eyes flickered to Eleanor for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible signal passing between them. Eleanor, still looking at Thomas, simply inclined her head, a silent, powerful directive. The security guard turned back to Alexander, his stance unwavering. "I understand, sir. However, Ms. Vance has specific instructions regarding her current engagements." His tone was devoid of malice, yet it held an undeniable authority that left no room for argument. The implication was clear. Eleanor was no longer merely his wife. She was a power unto herself, with her own rules and her own protection. Alexander stood frozen, his jaw tight, his carefully constructed composure shattering around him. He felt every eye in the room upon him, watching his public rejection, his complete emasculation. The whispers grew louder, turning into a low, collective gasp. He wanted to lash out, to shout, to smash something, but he was trapped, powerless, caught in a spotlight of his own making. The polished marble floor beneath his feet suddenly seemed unstable. He saw Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, a smirk playing on her painted lips as she leaned over to her companion, clearly enjoying his spectacular downfall. The sight of her mocking gaze was a fresh stab of agony. With a choked sound of utter defeat, Alexander stumbled back, retreating to the nearest wall, his back pressing against the cool, gilded plaster. He felt the rough texture of the wall through his expensive suit jacket, a small, grounding sensation in his spiraling world. He watched, horrified, as Thomas Thorne produced a sleek, silver tablet, its screen illuminating the faces of key executives, projected onto the large display screens that usually showed Alexander's company logos. The screens now prominently displayed the stylized VE of Vance Enterprises, larger and more dominant than Alexander's own corporate insignia. The announcer, a man whose voice had previously been full of praise for Alexander, now spoke with a deferential tone, his words carefully chosen. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored tonight to finalize a monumental merger, one that promises to reshape our industry, and it is with immense pride that we acknowledge the visionary leadership of Vance Enterprises, the driving force behind this strategic alliance. The announcer gestured toward Eleanor's table, a spotlight now illuminating her, bathing her in a soft golden glow. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady, absorbing every word. The air itself seemed to hum with a newfound respect for her. She heard the shift in the announcer's voice, the careful emphasis on Vance Enterprises, the subtle but profound reordering of the narrative. It was exactly as she had orchestrated, every detail unfolding with chilling precision. She saw the faces in the crowd, many of whom had once dismissed her as a mere accessory to her husband, now looking at her with genuine awe and curiosity. A faint smile touched her lips, a brief, private moment of triumph. The formal proceedings continued. The merger documents, thick and bound in leather, were brought to a central podium. The announcer invited the representatives from both sides to approach. Alexander watched, his vision blurring, as Eleanor, with a quiet elegance, rose from her seat. Her gown shimmered, a flowing cascade of deep emerald green, as she moved towards the podium. She carried herself with an air of unshakable confidence, a natural authority that commanded attention without effort. Thomas Thorne followed a step behind her, a loyal sentinel. Alexander felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a heavy, suffocating weight. He saw her reach the podium, saw the pen handed to her. It was a heavy silver instrument, gleaming under the bright lights. His entire body tensed, anticipating the inevitable, yet utterly powerless to prevent it. His hands trembled, a slight tremor that ran through his whole frame. He felt the cold sweat on his palms, the dryness in his mouth. Eleanor took the pen, its cool metal a pleasant weight in her hand. Her fingers, adorned with the Vance Enterprises seal ring, moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace. She glanced down at the document. Her name, Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Enterprises, emblazoned boldly at the top of the signatory page, overshadowing the smaller, secondary space reserved for Alexander Sterling. A finality settled over her, a quiet resolution. She lifted her eyes, meeting Alexander's anguished gaze across the room for a fleeting moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no overt triumph, only a profound, almost weary understanding. Then, with a gentle, decisive motion, she lowered the pen to the paper. The soft scratch of the nib against the parchment was almost imperceptible in the vast ballroom, yet it echoed in Alexander's mind like a gunshot. He watched, paralyzed, as her elegant signature unfurled, bold and clear, a testament to her unyielding power. The deed was done. His world, built on a foundation of borrowed wealth and inflated ego, had crumbled. He was nothing but a spectator, utterly helpless. As Eleanor calmly signed the final merger documents, her name now prominently displayed as the CEO of Vance Enterprises, overshadowing his own. The echo of Alexander's stumbling words still hung heavy in the air, a phantom of his collapsed triumph. Eleanor felt the weight of countless eyes upon her, a palpable pressure that would have once made her shrink, but now it merely settled like a comfortable cloak. She took a slow sip of the crisp, dry champagne, its chill a pleasant contrast to the warmth radiating from the velvet-lined table. A faint whisper of expensive perfume drifted past, mingling with the scent of white roses arranged in a crystal vase nearby. The murmur of the room, once a chaotic babble, had shifted into a low, speculative hum, a current of recalculation flowing through the elite gathering. Just as a waiter silently refilled her glass, a distinguished figure approached her table. Thomas Thorne, his silver hair gleaming under the grand chandeliers, offered her a small, knowing smile. He pulled out the chair beside her with an easy grace, settling in as if it were the most natural thing in the world. His presence was a subtle, yet undeniable reinforcement of her position. Every eye, Alexander's included, watched their quiet interaction, trying to decipher its meaning. Eleanor felt a quiet satisfaction bloom within her chest, a gentle warmth that spread through her veins. This was not about vengeance, not entirely, but about reclaiming what was rightfully hers, about standing in her own truth. "Eleanor," Thomas began, his voice a low, measured tone that barely carried beyond their immediate space. "The initial reactions are precisely as we anticipated, a delightful cascade of surprise, followed by immediate recognition of true power." She met his gaze, her blue eyes clear and unwavering. "Surprise was merely the appetizer, Thomas. The main course is yet to come." Her voice was soft, barely audible above the din, yet it carried an underlying steel, a confidence Alexander had never heard before. She observed the ballroom, a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, a collection of faces now openly staring, whispering behind gloved hands. The air thrummed with a nervous energy, a palpable shift in the social hierarchy. A chill, perhaps from an open door, touched her bare shoulders, but she did not shiver. Thomas leaned closer, his expression earnest. The details of the merger announcement will proceed as planned, but with a slight public reordering of priority. Vance Enterprises will now be explicitly named as the primary driver, the architect of this entire endeavor. He placed a slim, leather-bound folder on the table between them, its pages filled with neat, formal script. The heavy paper felt cool beneath Eleanor's fingertips. She felt the subtle weight of her signet ring, the intricate VE emblem pressing against her skin, a constant, tangible reminder of her authority. Across the room, Alexander Sterling felt a raw, burning sensation spread through his chest, tightening his breath. He watched Eleanor, sitting composed and regal, chatting with Thomas Thorne, as if the world had not just been turned upside down. His triumph, the culmination of years of relentless ambition, had evaporated like smoke. His mind reeled, trying to grasp the impossible reality unfolding before him. His Eleanor, his quiet, simple wife, the head of Vance Enterprises. It was a ludicrous thought, a cruel, elaborate joke. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The gasps, the whispers, the way every powerful figure in the room now gravitated towards her table, their gazes filled with a mixture of awe and respect. The rich, heady scent of his own success now smelled like ash. A desperate, primal urge to regain control surged through him. He had to confront her, to demand an explanation, to make sense of this devastating illusion. His legs felt heavy, yet he pushed himself forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply on the marble floor. He moved with a speed born of panic, his eyes fixed on Eleanor, ignoring the curious, pitying glances that followed him. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, all faded into a dull roar in his ears. He needed to reach her, to pull her aside, to tear down this elaborate facade. As he closed the distance, his heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread. He could almost taste the fear, sharp and metallic in the back of his throat. He saw the corner of Eleanor's mouth twitch, a barely perceptible movement, as if she sensed his approach without even looking up. Before he could utter a single word, a tall, impeccably dressed man in a dark suit, who had been standing discreetly a few feet from Eleanor's table, stepped forward. The man's posture was firm, his expression polite but unyielding. "Mr. Sterling," the security detail said, his voice calm and even, a low rumble that cut through Alexander's rising panic. Perhaps a moment later, "Ms. Vance is currently engaged in a private discussion." Alexander felt a jolt, a sudden cold shock. He bristled, his face flushing crimson. "I am her husband," he snapped, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. His hand clenched into a fist, the silk of his cufflink digging into his palm. He could feel the heat on his cheeks, the burning humiliation intensified by the security guard's impassive gaze and the sudden acute attention from those nearby. The air around him suddenly felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken judgment. The security man's eyes flickered to Eleanor for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible signal passing between them. Eleanor, still looking at Thomas, simply inclined her head, a silent, powerful directive. The security guard turned back to Alexander, his stance unwavering. "I understand, sir. However, Ms. Vance has specific instructions regarding her current engagements." His tone was devoid of malice, yet it held an undeniable authority that left no room for argument. The implication was clear. Eleanor was no longer merely his wife. She was a power unto herself, with her own rules and her own protection. Alexander stood frozen, his jaw tight, his carefully constructed composure shattering around him. He felt every eye in the room upon him, watching his public rejection, his complete emasculation. The whispers grew louder, turning into a low, collective gasp. He wanted to lash out, to shout, to smash something, but he was trapped, powerless, caught in a spotlight of his own making. The polished marble floor beneath his feet suddenly seemed unstable. He saw Lady Beatrice Ainsworth, a smirk playing on her painted lips as she leaned over to her companion, clearly enjoying his spectacular downfall. The sight of her mocking gaze was a fresh stab of agony. With a choked sound of utter defeat, Alexander stumbled back, retreating to the nearest wall, his back pressing against the cool, gilded plaster. He felt the rough texture of the wall through his expensive suit jacket, a small, grounding sensation in his spiraling world. He watched, horrified, as Thomas Thorne produced a sleek, silver tablet, its screen illuminating the faces of key executives, projected onto the large display screens that usually showed Alexander's company logos. The screens now prominently displayed the stylized VE of Vance Enterprises, larger and more dominant than Alexander's own corporate insignia. The announcer, a man whose voice had previously been full of praise for Alexander, now spoke with a deferential tone, his words carefully chosen. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored tonight to finalize a monumental merger, one that promises to reshape our industry. And it is with immense pride that we acknowledge the visionary leadership of Vance Enterprises, the driving force behind this strategic alliance. The announcer gestured toward Eleanor's table, a spotlight now illuminating her, bathing her in a soft, golden glow. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady, absorbing every word. The air itself seemed to hum with a newfound respect for her. She heard the shift in the announcer's voice, the careful emphasis on Vance Enterprises, the subtle but profound reordering of the narrative. It was exactly as she had orchestrated, every detail unfolding with chilling precision. She saw the faces in the crowd, many of whom had once dismissed her as a mere accessory to her husband, now looking at her with genuine awe and curiosity. A faint smile touched her lips, a brief, private moment of triumph. The formal proceedings continued. The merger documents, thick and bound in leather, were brought to a central podium. The announcer invited the representatives from both sides to approach. Alexander watched, his vision blurring, as Eleanor, with a quiet elegance, rose from her seat. Her gown shimmered, a flowing cascade of deep emerald green, as she moved towards the podium. She carried herself with an air of unshakable confidence, a natural authority that commanded attention without effort. Thomas Thorne followed a step behind her, a loyal sentinel. Alexander felt a cold dread settle in his stomach, a heavy, suffocating weight. He saw her reach the podium, saw the pen handed to her. It was a heavy silver instrument, gleaming under the bright lights. His entire body tensed, anticipating the inevitable, yet utterly powerless to prevent it. His hands trembled, a slight tremor that ran through his whole frame. He felt the cold sweat on his palms, the dryness in his mouth. Eleanor took the pen, its cool metal a pleasant weight in her hand, her fingers adorned with the Vance Enterprises seal ring. Moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace, she glanced down at the document, her name, Eleanor Vance, CEO of Vance Enterprises, emblazoned boldly at the top of the signatory page, overshadowing the smaller, secondary space reserved for Alexander Sterling. A finality settled over her, a quiet resolution. She lifted her eyes, meeting Alexander's anguished gaze across the room for a fleeting moment. There was no anger in her eyes, no overt triumph, only a profound, almost weary understanding. Then, with a gentle, decisive motion, she lowered the pen to the paper. The soft scratch of the nib against the parchment was almost imperceptible in the vast ballroom, yet it echoed in Alexander's mind like a gunshot. He watched, paralyzed, as her elegant signature unfurled, bold and clear, a testament to her unyielding power. The deed was done. His world, built on a foundation of borrowed wealth and inflated ego, had crumbled. He was nothing but a spectator, utterly helpless. As Eleanor calmly signed the final merger documents, her name now prominently displayed as the CEO of Vance Enterprises, overshadowing his own. The champagne flutes hammered in Alexander's skull. His colleagues' faces held pitying smiles. Their gazes pricked his skin as Eleanor signed the final documents. Each pen stroke severed him from his identity. The perfumed air suffocated him. He needed to escape, away from judging eyes and his own foolishness. His legs felt rubbery. Guests hushed as he passed, then resumed their talk. His heavy breathing drowned the jazz music. He tasted bile. His tie felt tight. He found a secluded alcove behind a velvet curtain. The alcove air was cooler. He slumped onto a crimson fauteuil, rough against his trembling hands. The city's hum was a lonely drone. Skyscraper lights mocked his ambition. His world had been meticulously dismantled. He buried his face in his hands, a guttural sound escaping him. A rustle of silk cut through the ringing in his ears. He lifted his head, knowing it was Eleanor. She moved with unsettling calm, her gown shimmering. Her perfume, once familiar, now carried an edge of power. Her eyes, usually soft, now held a piercing clarity. Her presence brought a cold chill. "Alexander," she said, her voice measured, holding unshakable authority. "We need to talk." He flinched, his heart hammering. "What is there to say?" he managed, his voice raspy. "You have shamed me." Eleanor stepped closer, the Vance Enterprises seal ring gleaming. "Shame is a mirror, Alexander. I merely held it up for you. For years, you paraded your arrogance. You believed you were a titan. Every triumph, every deal, every rung you climbed was because I allowed it." He shook his head in denial. "That's not true. I built this. My vision, my drift, my work." He tried to rise but sank back. "Your vision was often my suggestion," Eleanor corrected, her voice sorrowful. "Your drive came from my resources. Your diligent work was guided by strategies I conceived years before you." Her voice dropped, a tremor of pain. "Do you remember the Westbridge acquisition, your masterstroke?" He remembered. It had been his defining moment. He had boasted for months. "Months before you heard of Westbridge, I had my team preparing the ground," she continued. "When you dismissed my input, I steered you towards information and contacts, ensuring your success. I ensured you saw what I wanted. It was a delicate dance, keeping you convinced of your brilliance while I orchestrated everything." A cold sweat broke out. Her words, her conviction, were crushing. He remembered his dismissive remarks, his disdain. He had told her to focus on trivialities. Eleanor's voice held the slow burn of anguish. "You called my ideas simple, Alexander, too unsophisticated. You said my quiet nature would detract from your image. You never saw me as anything more than an accessory, a quiet fixture. You wanted a reflection of your own curated world, a silent mirror." His head swam with callousness, with blindness. He believed her a decorative piece, a testament to his good taste. His hubris was a physical blow. The air felt heavy with his past slights. "Every time you dismissed my concerns," Eleanor stated, her voice a low murmur, "you dismissed your empire's foundation. You reveled in your self-made myth. Never seeing the ground beneath your feet was a garden I tended for you to mistakenly believe you had planted." He felt the phantom sting of her earlier words. He always saw her as weak. The reality was a monstrous distortion. He had been the puppet, dancing on unseen strings, while she, the puppeteer, watched. "Why buy?" The word tore from his chest. "Why did you let me believe? Why allow me to be so blind?" Eleanor's gaze softened, showing the pain he had inflicted. "Because I loved you, Alexander. I loved the man I thought you could be. I wanted your ambition to be genuine, for you to grow into the leader you claimed." Her voice held profound weariness. "I gave you every opportunity, hoping you would see me as an equal partner. I watched you become enamored with your own reflection." The silence was deafening, broken by muffled gala laughter. He felt unshed tears, a hot, shameful flood. He squeezed his eyes shut, blocking out her poised, powerful control. His financial dependence, his wealth's true source, dawned with brutal clarity. Every grand gesture, every gift, every possession came from her money, her strategies, her silent hand. He opened his eyes, tears streaming, carving paths through his shattered pride. He looked at her, perhaps for the first time. Her quiet strength, her unwavering blue eyes, her subtle authority. He saw not the simple woman he scorned, but the architect of his world, its rise and fall. His voice was a broken whisper, barely audible. You, you owned everything? All of it? You owned everything? All of it?" Alexander whispered, his voice ragged above the gala's fading murmur. His eyes, once sharp, held only terrified confusion. Eleanor met his gaze, her blue eyes calm. The Vance Enterprises seal ring felt light on her finger. Yes, Alexander, she said, her voice soft but final. Every piece from the beginning, before we met. She watched the horror dawn on his face. His empire was a mirage, built on sand she provided. A bitter taste filled her mouth. Victory came at an immense personal cost. I watched you believe you built your empire, she continued, each word a stone. I gave you resources, connections, the silent capital for your ascent. I wanted to see if the man I married still existed beneath your ambition. Her voice wavered. The young woman who loved him was a ghost in this cold room. Alexander shook his head. His designer suit hung loosely on his slumped frame, his shirt rumpled. Wait, he choked out, a plea for understanding. Why would you do that to me? Because I loved you, Eleanor replied, a painful sigh. The confession hung fragile in the air. I believed in the man who valued passion over power. I wanted your success. But you chased public adoration, proving yourself to strangers, not me. You forgot true connection. She gestured at the ballroom, its grandeur a mockery. You traded everything for this image, for shallow applause. He looked at her, his eyes bloodshot, a raw nerve exposed. His cologne mixed with the tang of his fear. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only silent sobs that tore at him. He saw the truth in her eyes, a truth he had long refused. He remembered his dismissive cruelty, how he had ignored her presence, her wisdom. Eleanor felt a cold detachment, born of years of suffering, her fingers clenched, her locket pressing against her skin. She had offered him every chance to see her, to value her, to share an equal life. He chose to make her a mere accessory. Her decision settled deep, a heavy stone of certainty. Vance Enterprises was built on integrity, on respect, she stated, her voice steady. True power comes from within. You believed you were a titan, but you were a puppet, dancing on unseen strings. She took a deep breath. The man I married would be horrified by who you became. I mourned him long ago. Alexander slid down the wall, collapsing onto a velvet banquette, his face in his hands. His shoulders shook. His world imploded, orchestrated by the woman he discarded. The irony crushed him. His empire was never his, and the woman he called simple was his architect of rise and fall. Eleanor watched him, feeling a complex weariness. There was no joy, only a sharp pang of sorrow. It was not for the broken man, but for the ghost of who he once was. Ambition had devoured his kindness. She remembered his boyish grin, his eager plans, his warm hand in hers. That Alexander was long gone, lost beneath layers of conceit. News of the gala spread fast, exploding across global financial markets. News anchors spoke in hushed tones. Business journals ran scathing editorials. Alexander Sterling's story, brought low by the secret owner of Vance Enterprises, became an overnight sensation. His cultivated image, once an asset, became his liability. The fall was swift, brutal, public. Sterling's company stock plummeted. Investors, spooked by concealed ownership, withdrew capital. Board members, desperate, held emergency meetings. Alexander Sterling was stripped of his CEO title within days, his name tarnished. The grand merger was now solely a Vance Enterprises triumph, with Eleanor Vance at its helm. He lost his company, his reputation, his credibility. His life's foundations crumbled. Eleanor, insulated by her company and Thomas Thorne's loyalty, managed the fallout. She restored stability, calmed investors, and positioned Vance Enterprises for a greater future. Amidst the strategic meetings, a quiet satisfaction settled, but sorrow persisted. It was grief for a soured love, a fractured partnership. Her victory felt hollow, a testament to what she had lost. She took one last look at Alexander, slumped and defeated. The ballroom grew colder, guests gone, leaving only echoes in the scent of withered roses. Her gaze hardened. He made his choices, and she made hers. There was nothing more to say. Her journey with Alexander Sterling was over. With a resolute breath, Eleanor turned. She adjusted her locket, affirming her resilience. She walked away, her steps firm, leaving Alexander to face his hubris. Her heels echoed on the marble floor. a cadence of freedom. She was no longer a shadow, no longer a simple wife. She was Eleanor Vance, master of her own destiny. She stepped into the cool night air, city lights reflecting in her eyes. The chill invigorated her. A single tear traced her cheek, a tear of profound release, and the hopeful weight of a new path.